informed by a little bit of what was going on with the pandemic and how that fundamentally changed the cadence of work that my teams were grappling with. I had really no visibility to who was burnt out and who was bored. And I didn't have any real process to do that, because what I used to do is walk around people's desks, talk to them. I could do that and get a sense for how busy or not they were. But in the era of post-COVID, where folks are only in the office several days a week, and your coming in the office might not overlap with theirs, it's a key construct. So, but let me give you the example through one of my R&D leaders. And I'll do it through 3 snapshots. The first snapshot was I land at a Fortune company that got acquired, so I can talk about it now. I landed at a Fortune company, and this is basically my R&D leader. On my first meeting with my R&D leader, she says, "Hey, Walt, team's freaking busier than heck." Right? We're overworked. You know, we're absolutely gonna have an issue, and I need more resources. That was the first conversation I remember having. And by the way, this particular individual is a rock star. So my R&D leader, known to be kind of, is being mentored by some of the senior leaders in the business, is highly thought of player in the business, and by the way, deservingly so. She's the real deal. So I sit down and talk with her, and I said, "Okay, so can you tell me what folks are working on?" And she goes, "Well, crap, we really don't have, Walt, we really don't have a view of that. In 2 weeks, I'm sure I can get everyone to kind of populate what that is and get back with you at our next one-on-one, and then we'll share kind of the workload, the burnout, and the or the boredom story." But it was going to be a burnout story in there. So then, so 2 weeks later, she comes back to my office, and I asked a couple of questions. I said, "Okay, so wow, these are the projects that each of your teams are working on." I asked a simple question. The first question I said was, "Are they consistent with the policy?" And she kind of looked at me quizzically, and I said, she goes, well, what do you mean, Walt?" And I said, "Well, our policy says we're going to actually address things that are greater than $100,000. Or is your team actually adhering to the policy, or are they extending beyond that dollar threshold to things we probably shouldn't be working on, because that would be the equivalent when you need a fly swatter, using a bazooka when you need a fly swatter." And she goes, "Oh gosh, that's interesting. So let me now do a cut of these data to figure out what percentage of the stuff is less than $100,000, and what percent of the stuff is within the policy is the stuff that moves the needle." And by the way, the data that I already had was that 95% of the stuff that they should be working on, I knew what the counts were for that population, and the counts that I was seeing were materially higher from her team than what the policy was suggesting we should be having. And so everyone knows the way procurement sizes their work is they actually look at the transaction record to figure out, okay, how many transactions are there, the spend threshold, how much spend do I really want to manage, and then how do we make sure I have the staffing levels to get after the number of transactions that are driven by that particular group. So she comes back, and roughly 30 to 40% of the stuff that her team was working on and being burnt out on was stuff that was less than $100,000. And she shares with me that it feels like the R&D, PhDs and R&D were just shoving stuff to the procurement team to kind of work through, because they didn't want to absorb any PhD talent, which probably is the right call to kind of run at that. And so we needed to find a better set of solutions for the business, such that we could, and by the way, I've got in my R&D team a bunch of lawyers. So I think probably 50%, 60% of players are lawyers, a bunch of MBAs, the other 50% were MBAs. And so highly trained. And these are kind of negotiators. These are, trained negotiators for big deals in the clinical space for the business. And she goes, "Oh crap." So I said, "So it sounds like I, as the new guy, need to have a conversation with the head of R&D, who's a pay grade above where I'm at." Right, I think it was an SVP. This guy was an EVP. And I need to do that in front of all of his leaders. And I need to share with them a series of stories that will help them understand that, here are the resources we've got in procurement. Here's what they're dedicated to get after. And we need to architect for them a way to get this other stuff done without burdening this population of people to kind of get after it. We had to win them over, just that we were basically using bazooka talent, lawyers and MBAs to do rounding error stuff inappropriately. And I needed to get their cooperation to pivot off of that kind of bad behavioral dynamic. Fortunately, the R&D leader was a guy I served on a board with, so I already had kind of a pretty good rapport. So a board outside the company, we were on the board of another company, and so I already had a pretty good rapport with him. And what I did, instead of having that conversation kind of one-on-one or one to many, one procurement person to many of their resources, I brought my leader in with me, right? The R&D leader. Because I said, this is how you run interference for your team to make sure they're focusing on the right stuff. And this is what I call taking obstacles out of the way for your team so they can focus on the stuff that matters. And we shared with the R&D leaders that, hey, we think that the population of stuff we should be working on every year looks like about 1,000 big deals deep. And those 1,000 big deals, basis history, represent 85% of your billion plus spending profile. Actually, it was like 92%. I think it was north of 85% of the spend. We think with that, you've got adequate coverage. And then you've got, several thousand things that are sub that threshold. We're going to invent with you other ways to get that stuff resourced so we can move at the speed of business and make it work. And we'd already had a pilot in place for a couple of solutions. And we ended up actually taking that from pilot mode to scaling it up. And we ended up bolting on a different set of engagement frameworks for them. But at the end of the day, we were able to take the burnout out of the cadence of my workers in R&D. And then, the world changed, right? We had COVID. They went from, 1,000 plus transactions a year to, with the clinics closed, to not much work almost overnight. And I didn't have a way to visibly understand how the deal flow changed by program down to the individual level. And so I really didn't know who was bored in my ecosystem of very talented R&D players and who was still overly burdened, because many of them had to actually pivot from clinical trials where people had to show up in a clinic to remote clinical trial constructs, which meant inventing a whole new engagement model with clinical trial participants across the world to make that go. We actually we use tools, different set of tools, to understand the boredom and the burnout. So who's overworked and who's bored, who doesn't have enough work, constructs within our business. And my R&D leader could level load her team better, basis kind of the dynamic deal flow from the business. And so I would encourage you to ask yourself this question about your procurement team today. Do you have a boredom issue or a burnout issue? And I contend both of them need to be fixed. You need to figure out how to get visibility. If you don't, I'd welcome getting an opportunity for you to send something in the messaging below on either Instagram, IG me, hit me up, but just and if you want to compare notes on what's out there that might be able to help you, be more than happy to connect to help you get solutions to understand how to better utilize the staffing you've got to get after the things that move the needle most for the business. With that, let's get after it.